welcome to Talking Mental Health, a podcast from the Wellness Project where I interview mental health professionals on all things mental health and wellness. I'm here today with Janelle. Janelle, do you mind introducing yourself to everyone?
Of course. Thank you, Allison, for having me and everyone at Talking Mental Health. Super excited to be here. My name is Janelle Jones, and I am a nationally certified counselor as well as a doctoral candidate in the Counselor Education and Supervision program at the University of Alabama. I am a national board certified counselor's doctoral fellow and also serve as the member at large for the Association of Adult Development and Aging. My research interests are gerontological counseling, racialized trauma, and mentorship in counselor education. I am a program coordinator for a program at the University of Alabama called Tie Together Mentorship Program. So we kind of pair underrepresented graduate students with peer and faculty mentors. And I'm a mental health advocate, travel enthusiast, an avid binge watcher of all TV shows. And when I'm not nose deep in a school book, I love reading fiction novels. So I'm super excited to engage in the conversation today. And I hope everyone enjoys this discussion. I do want to note that none of the information I'm sharing today constitutes as therapy. And this conversation should not serve in replacement of a conversation with a licensed mental health professional.
Gosh, I love that you included that last part so much. Yeah. I think that is something so important to name in these spaces. And so I really appreciate that.
Of course.
We're talking about imposter syndrome today. I'm very excited. I feel like I say I'm excited every time I record one of these, but I love talking about these topics that we don't talk about often.
Yes.
I love normalizing having this conversation with people. And so I'm going to say it again. I'm so excited for imposter syndrome. So if you're ready, I'm going to get into the questions. If you're good.
I'm ready.
Yeah. So just starting off, the big question, what is imposter syndrome?
So according to Psychology Today, imposter syndrome, also known as imposter's phenomenon, is a psychological phenomenon in which people are unable to internalize their accomplishments. So it oftentimes presents as feelings of fraudulence. One of the key things about imposter syndrome is that it is internalized or internal, meaning that many people experience it alone, and some think that they're the only ones experiencing it, which is not true. Many of us experience it. There was a study that said anywhere between 9 and 89% of the U.S. population experiences imposter syndrome. And that's a huge range, but it's like we literally never know who is experiencing it. So one of the things about imposter syndrome as well is that it is transformative, meaning it can occur in different stages of life. I like to compare it to evolving as a Pokemon. And so it can hit you at different stages as you're like leveling up in life. It also presents differently for different folks. So for some, they're passing thoughts. For other folks, they're more looming thoughts, specifically surrounding like larger events and larger life tasks. Others, you see symptoms start to manifest somatically. So in the body, we're seeing folks with sweaty palms, panic attack-like symptoms, even holding tension in the body. All of those can be a result from imposter syndrome. So it runs the gamut in terms of presentation and what that feels like for each individual.
Wow. We're one question in and I'm already so excited. Again, there's that word excited, but so many things. First of all, that I feel like that gap of 9 to 89 really shows like how much people are internalizing. Because this is one of those terms where, and I'll get into this kind of in the second question too, is I just feel like I'm all of a sudden hearing it so much. And so that like makes me think about like the fact that it was probably always here. We just weren't talking about it. We weren't sharing it, which is why I love having these conversations, because to think about all those people who are internalizing it and thinking they're alone when really there could be that many people also experiencing that same thing and also keeping it to themselves, you know?
No, for sure. And that's why I love platforms like these, because it helps kind of combat the stigma surrounding all things mental health. And this is just one of those aspects where it's been stigmatized to feel fraudulent for whatever reason, to feel like you are not living up to either potential or presenting the way that you should. And so here we are to destigmatize it.
Yeah. And that word fraudulent too, I feel like it's already so hard to be moving through life. And I mean, those achievements that make you feel this way should be normal, right? Like we should be able to just step into those shoes, but just because of like the way society works, we have those kind of emotions and feelings inside our head of like, is this my life? Am I
Hmm.
actually here right now doing this thing?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gosh. Um, I mean, so I guess kind of to mirror some of what I was just saying is I do feel like I didn't hear a lot of this phrase until recently.
Hmm.
Now I hear it's all over social media, as you know, I see TikToks about it. I hear people just casually like, yeah, I'm feeling a little bit like I have imposter syndrome right now. And they just throw it out there as opposed to, I mean, I can't even think of like a few years ago whether or not I even knew what this phrase was or had heard it before. And so I'm curious, is there any reason for that we hear about it now as opposed to before? Is it just like a normalizing thing?
So I think in part, normalization of it, as you mentioned, social media has a large part in kind of bringing it to the light and forefront for many of our current conversations. But imposter syndrome is not new. It's not a new concept. So it goes back
Mhm.
to 1978. It's coming up on
Okay.
its 45th anniversary of being a thing. And even before it was named, it was still an experience. It just didn't have a
Mhm.
name to it. Folks didn't know how to articulate that or identify it. But the term itself was introduced by Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes in an article they published in 1978. It was titled The Imposter Phenomenon in High Achieving Women, Dynamics and Therapeutic Intervention. And so they define imposter syndrome as like an internal experience of intellectual phoniness. And
Okay.
so most of that was focused on the intellectual properties. And now we've kind of expanded that definition to go just beyond intellect because it shows up in more than academic spaces or workplace
Mhm.
spaces. But um, they positioned imposter syndrome truly as something that exists in the internal thoughts of folks related to their success, and noted that people really were believing that their success was due to chance or due to luck instead of their own talents, skills, or
Mhm.
qualifications. And so the term itself isn't new, but I do believe that there's been a resurgence of that conversation surrounding imposter syndrome. And I'm super
Mhm.
glad as a society that there is, because having those dialogues, even in the workplace, in our friend circles, college campuses, ministries, etc., about our experiences kind of helps to normalize that further. And so love seeing it on TikTok, love seeing it in social media memes and like all the grad school pages that I follow where
Yeah.
folks kind of talk about imposter syndrome and make it feel even normal for myself and my experiences surrounding it too.
Yeah, and we talked about this beforehand, but I'm in grad school and I have had those conversations with, like, people in my cohort, like, straight up, "I have imposter syndrome. Where am I right now? What am
Yes.
I doing? Why am I allowed to do this?" All the things. Yeah, and I appreciate the history you kind of gave on it too, because I feel like that kind of makes it a little easier to normalize having that conversation. I feel like
Mhm.
it gives us that little background of, like, I'm feeling these things, but do you know how many people before me have also felt these things?
Yes.
And I feel
Entire
like that,
generations of people before us felt these
yeah,
things. Yeah.
because even like you said, in 1978, you said that study
Yes.
was from, and that's kind of where the term comes from, but it's been going on before that.
Mhm.
And so it kind of adds into that feeling of like, you feel alone in this, but you're not alone. So I really love that history you gave us there on where the term comes from.
Yeah.
Why do we experience imposter syndrome? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but I don't know if there's any more like in-depth stuff we can go into on it.
For sure. So we're not always in control of our thoughts and feelings. So
Mhm.
when folks feel like a phony or fraudulent, it's likely not because they want to, right? So like no one wants to feel fraudulent or
Mhm.
feel unqualified, unskilled, or that they're only where they're at in life because of luck or chance. Um, Sometimes imposter syndrome can be linked to personality traits such as perfectionism. It can be linked
Mm.
to family history, and there are other societal factors such as inequity and more that kind of contribute to it. So, love to break that
Mhm.
down a little bit. Valerie Young categorized 5 different archetypes for folks experiencing imposter syndrome. She wrote a book in 2011 that kind of differentiated aspects of imposter syndrome. So I'll go over the 5 real quick. Um, First, there's the expert. So that is categorization. The expert doesn't typically feel satisfied when they're finishing a task until they know everything about the subject. Experts are typically always on the hunt for new information. And so, for the example of this conversation right now, if I were the expert, I would have researched imposter syndrome for 27 days before this conversation and still wouldn't feel like I knew enough to talk about it. There's also the perfectionist as another archetype. So perfectionism, again, as a trait that contributes to imposter syndrome. People aim for perfection. They often experience high levels of anxiety and a lot of worry, a lot of self-doubt, and trying to be perfect and trying to achieve some of their goals. And so a lot of perfectionists are dissatisfied with their work, feel like it's never enough, which also leads to those feelings of fraudulence, of like, this is not good enough. Other folks are going to know it's not good enough. It's not perfect. Thirdly, there's the natural genius. So these are the folks who are always mastering new skills with a whole bunch of ease. So if you've ever had that friend that just picks up anything, like whether it's fishing or coding on a computer, they just know how to pick up something naturally. They fit into this archetype, but a lot of folks who fall into this category kind of fail to recognize that it's okay to not pick up everything quickly. And so if they get onto a new job or start a new class, for example, in college, and they don't pick up the material immediately, they start to struggle with imposter syndrome of like, why am I not getting this? I should be getting this. There's also, fourthly, the soloist. So that's the person who wants to be an individual, also known as an individualist. They prefer to work alone and feel like asking for help will show that they're incompetent. So this is a person, at least in my reference of group work, this is a person who's always like, do we have to work in groups? I want to work by myself, right? Which sometimes I've been that person. It's fine. But these folks often turn down help so that they can prove their own individual worth. And some of that can stem back to family history as well. Finally, there's the superhero. And the superhero excels in all things, typically because they are always pushing themselves so hard. And so a lot of folks who are considered workaholics are also considered superheroes. And a lot of that work leads to burnout and feelings of imposter syndrome. So there are 5, I guess, archetypes related to imposter syndrome, but there are other factors that contribute to imposter syndrome. So again, pressure from family, being deemed an expert in the family. A lot of first generation kids know that feeling as well, of the first person to go to college, first person to go to school. So you have to be the best, you have to know everything, right? And so you might fall into the earlier archetype I mentioned of the expert. You need to be the expert because your family's counting on you to be the expert. Sometimes college settings and being a first-gen student contributes to imposter syndrome on campuses. So again, a lot of first-gen students can experience feelings of not belonging. They don't have a blueprint to follow. And so there's no one to fill them in and give them advice on how to kind of navigate some experiences all the time, unless they just pair with really great mentors or have a really great support system on their university campus. And so a lot of folks end up feeling like they're lucky to be at school. It was a chance accident that they got in. I'm also interested to see if folks who were enrolled or started universities during the pandemic due to a lack of needing test scores feel like, oh, had I taken the ACT, I probably wouldn't have got it. And it's like, you don't know that, but you might internalize those thoughts and feelings and feel that way. Also often happens with ethnic minorities, women in STEM. Anybody who identifies as a minority in specific spaces might feel as though they're lucky to be there, or they're a minority or a diversity hire, which is not always true. And so a lot of folks lean into imposter syndrome. There are a lot of external factors because these feelings don't exist in a bubble. For example, what's campus culture, right? Like, are all students made to feel welcome, that they belong, that they're capable? Are there signage and scholarship, even language that kind of indicates that you're lucky to be here, even if you're qualified and worked hard, worked your behind off to get here, right? All the messaging that we see kind of influences imposter syndrome in one way or another. So there are multiple factors that contribute to it, and different folks of all different personality types and all different upbringings can experience it in one way or another.
Wow, the first thing that's coming to my mind right now is just to say thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And it's just because I've already reiterated this on like every question I've asked you, but I think I'm going to pause for 1 second. I'm sure you can hear the dog going off this time. But so, gosh, I think that like what you did is kind of further this point that we've made this whole time that you're not alone.
Mhm.
You know, there were so many different archetypes and so many different reasons behind it that anybody could be experiencing imposter syndrome right now, you know? And that way you kind of made it cross cultural and spoke to all the different parts of society. Gosh, yes. Oh, that was so good. And I just don't even have I just want to let that be, I think. I don't want to pull anything else out of it because I
Okay.
just want that to sit as it is because it was so good.
Love that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Um, yeah. So one of the things I like to include in this podcast, actually, I'm gonna go to a different question first.
Okay.
Um, what is the overall impact of imposter syndrome?
Yeah, so it's going to vary person by person, right? And so all of us have different experiences in life. All of us have different ways in which we experience and express imposter syndrome. And so there are some overarching impacts, specifically for folks in university settings, that I can go over really quickly. So one of the ones that comes to mind immediately for me is paralysis. So being stuck at a standstill. It's not to be confused with procrastination, because I'm a procrastinator and I can push through in the very end. But if you're in
Mhm.
paralysis, there is no push through on the last minute at
Yeah.
11:59 p.m. Like you're stuck. And so imposter syndrome might keep you in a state of being paused and paralysis. Um, it can prevent folks from going after jobs that they want, internships that they'd like, awards that they deserve, but they're too afraid to compete for because they feel like they are undeserving.
Mhm.
It impacts people enjoying what they've earned. So folks downplay accomplishments. They don't relish in those moments of success. I don't know if you've ever been to like an awards banquet, but if you're walking across the stage to get the award, you might kind of clam up and be like, I don't deserve this award, right? Or
Mhm.
like that's the internal dialogue going on. So you can't even relish in those joyful moments. Um, Sometimes folks resent their peers for going after what they want. And so that's kind of difficult because if you see like your best friend or another peer getting an award, you're like, well, you know, why they apply for that? And you're sitting here mad at yourself truly that you didn't apply for it. So resentment can be an impact of that. Not participating, whether that's in class or at the workplace, it impacts your grade, likely. It impacts your um, the culture essentially of the office space as well. But folks are afraid to share because they feel like imposters. They feel like they're going to have the answer wrong, or folks are going to be judging them if their articulation of the answer isn't perfect. It can also present as self sabotage. So missing deadlines, intentionally not progressing forward, failure to respond to emails. I had to get that under control at one point in my graduate career. But it can manifest as self sabotage as well, also as distress. So folks get overwhelmed by imposter syndrome. It's a lot of feelings. There's anxiety, there's panic attacks, there's psychological or psychosomatic issues. One of my friends actually ended up having an ulcer the first year of her doctoral program, due to all of the distress surrounding her imposter syndrome. And so it can manifest in the body as well. And then overall self doubt. So
Mhm.
even if all your life you were confident in one specific area, all of a sudden you're doubting this area. And you're now less confident in other areas of your life. And so I use the example of you might be experiencing imposter syndrome in motherhood, and then it trickles over to the workplace, and then it trickles over to your relationships with your friends. It can plant the seed of self doubt that can grow uncontrollably.
Yeah, I appreciate you adding in all those real life examples.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a lot of times is why we don't have these conversations is because, you know, I heard this technical term, I don't know what that means. I heard
Mhm.
that this could be happening, but I don't really fully understand what that is to know if that's what's happening, you know? I
Yes.
talked to this person, they said this, and I don't understand it. And so I think adding those like real life examples of like, this is something that could happen and this is what it could look like helps
Mhm.
so much with our understanding of these things that we're hearing, whether it's in school and we're learning about it, whether our friends are talking about it happening to them, or we're in fact talking to someone ourselves about it. I feel like
Yeah.
it helps to have those like real life concrete examples to put in place with it, I think.
I'm an example type of girl, right? So like in class settings myself, I'm like, do you have an example, right, with that
Yeah.
concept? And so I try to give that out as much as I'd like to see it. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that. I loved that aspect of it. Um, I'm going out of order a little bit of these questions I gave you.
Yeah, it's fine.
But I'm gonna skip ahead to because we just talked about impact on like impact of imposter syndrome. But I'm
Yeah.
curious, we've already talked about social media a little bit and how we
Mhm.
hear that term in social media. But
Yes.
I feel like living in society the way we do now with all of the technology that's surrounding us, I feel like that has to have some of an impact on imposter syndrome. And I'm just curious if it does.
So yes, and short answer, yes, it does.
Yeah.
Um, great assumption there, but social media is a space where we can learn from others and we can see and keep up with what our friends and family members are doing. Yet and still, comparison comes in a lot.
Mhm.
And when you're comparing yourself to your peers or even those who are further along in their um, degree or in their career than you might be thinking like, oh, this person seems to be doing fine. They're not struggling. They don't seem to fail. They don't post to their Instagram story about being exhausted. They're managing everything well. And maybe they
Mhm.
aren't, and they're just not showing it. And then maybe they are, but it still doesn't mean that you're not allowed to have your own experience of struggle. And
Yeah.
so I was always raised to believe that comparison is a thief of joy, just to keep it biblical real quick. But like,
Mhm.
if I use social media to compare myself, my life, my experience to anyone else's, I won't necessarily be joyous all the time. And so social media can impact imposter syndrome likely a lot due to selective posting. So you're seeing the highlight reels of people's experiences. Someone's on a beach doing this, someone's getting this award, but you're not seeing a lot of their struggles. And we're all human beings, we all struggle in some way or another. And so you're seeing the highlight reel, you're seeing all the ups, none of the downs, and then you're cross comparing and saying like, well, then why am I having all these downs? Or like, why am I not
Yeah.
understanding this concept? Why am I not getting great grades? Why am I not right? And so you just end up in a cycle of comparison. The great thing is with social media, you are also then putting out an image on your own page. This also leads to feelings of fraudulence, right? And so like if you're posting everything's well, I'm on a beach, I'm getting awards, I'm doing great things, but then you're actually struggling, no one sees that, no one knows that. It
Mhm.
also increases imposter syndrome because you know that you are putting out something that you are not necessarily experiencing fully internally. Or you might even post, hey, I got this award, but you know, walking across that stage, you felt like you didn't deserve it. And
Mm.
so it's a tightrope to follow because we are in 2022. We're on social media. It's a great way to engage. Yet and still, sometimes we can walk away, we can log out of it feeling icky. And so one of the things I like to note is that as much of a negative impact that social media can have on imposter syndrome, it conversely has an opposite effect for some folks. So it's potentially on how you navigate social media. So, for example, I follow a lot of graduate school meme pages, and I've seen some really great memes on imposter syndrome that help kind of put my own experience into perspective. And so I'd like to share one of the tweets I saw that was created into a meme. It was from a guy named Brandon Kyle Goodman. Brandon noted imposter syndrome may come to you, but don't let it take away from you. It may cause you to question your greatness, but don't let it stop your greatness. Acknowledge it, then remind yourself that you are deserving, you are worthy, and you belong. And I saw that
Mm.
and I was like, you know what, Brandon? I am deserving, worthy, and I do
Yeah.
belong, right? And so social media can have that positive impact of like exposing you and really normalizing the fact that like other folks are dealing with it. Also, let me learn how other folks are dealing with it. What are folks saying on TikTok about how they've navigated imposter syndrome? What worked for them? And maybe that doesn't work for me, but I can try it. And so social media can have a positive impact on kind of mitigating or combating imposter
Mhm.
syndrome for folks.
Yeah, and it's just so interesting to me because I feel like it is that, like, good with the bad thing.
Mhm.
You know, in the very beginning of this conversation, we were talking about how, like, yes, it's being normalized. Yes, we're talking about it more on social media and we're seeing it talked about more. But then
Yes.
you have that side of things where that could also be part of the problem.
Mhm.
Or it could also be like that, not being our real authentic selves online is
Yes.
part of the problem.
Yeah.
And so it's I always find it interesting to bring social media into these spaces and kind of talk about that, like, good and bad, and see both
Mhm.
sides of it, because I think used in the right way, it could be such a beautiful thing, you know?
Yes.
But there are those downsides as well. And sometimes, we might just want to show this really good thing that happened, and we might want to use that as a way to just temporarily forget about that really bad thing that happened. But
Yes.
it is very much that good with the bad. Yeah.
Balance.
Balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I want to ask these last two together just because they kind of go together.
Okay.
One of the things I like to include in these is like, what can we do? Because we get stuck in these spaces of, I'm realizing something's wrong. I don't know what to do to help myself. Or I'm watching my friends struggle and I don't know what to do to help them. And so there's this aspect of like, what are ways we can help ourselves or ways we can help others when they are experiencing imposter syndrome?
Yeah. Okay. Wonderful questions and so necessary. One of the best things folks can do when experiencing imposter syndrome is acknowledge it and identify it as it's happening.
Mm,
So as you identify it, you can kind of see what are some of the causes. You can identify what are potential triggers for experiencing imposter syndrome. So let's use this conversation as an example. If in this moment I was experiencing imposter syndrome, I might notice sweaty palms and say, internally, I'm feeling like an imposter, not sure if I'm the best person to talk about this topic. What is causing this feeling? Right? If I sit and ask myself, why do I feel like I'm not the best person to talk about this topic? I might get down to the root of being like, well, maybe I'm afraid of being wrong, or maybe I just don't like public speaking, public stage, like, right? And so starting to identify what is causing these feelings, right? What
mhm,
about that specific scenario or the setting that you're in is causing you to feel like an imposter? And part of that identification is super important and kind of like demystifies it. If you think about like Scooby Doo when they like remove the mask from the villain, it's like, oh, this is my imposter syndrome. This is what it looks like, right? And so being able to identify when it's happening is super important. Additionally, talking to friends, family, therapists, faith leaders, peers, sharing helps normalize it. Cohort members, it gives other people a chance to support you and offer to support you. So, same example of this conversation, I told my mom that I was going to be on a podcast, and she was like, "You're going to do great. You're the smartest person I know." And I'm like, "Yes, mom, for the affirmations, I received that, right?"
yeah,
And so even opening up to my mom, like, hey, I'm a little nervous to do this podcast, mom. And then receiving that support is what I didn't realize I needed in the moment, but
mhm,
really came through for me. Also, again, identification is super important. So you identify your needs. What do you need when you're having feelings of imposter syndrome? Do you need affirmations? Do you need
mhm,
to vent to your friends? Do you want a hug? So you got to lean into our own self awareness around that. Identify what you need when you're going through imposter syndrome. Additionally, folks can challenge their negative thoughts. You can do that in multiple ways, but some of the questions I would ask myself is like, what is the story I'm telling myself? What is this narrative? And then what do I know about myself that negates these thoughts? So I'm feeling like an imposter, but like, what do I know to be true about me that lets me know that I'm not actually not? Like that I got
mhm,
this, or that I am smart, or that I am capable. Um, Additionally, preparation helps. So creating like a self-care plan, already having systems in place for when you're feeling that way helps. I'm a planner. And so like if only you could see my Google Calendar, but like leaning into your plans. Do you typically practice spiritual practices when you're feeling overwhelmed? Do you engage in physical exercise? Do you phone a friend, right? Like create a plan for yourself. And when imposter syndrome hits you out of the blue, or if it's hitting you hard, go ahead and lean into that plan. Additionally, keeping track of accomplishments, super important, whether it's your CV, awards on the wall, photos in your phone, things that remind you that you are qualified, that you are capable. So you, in moments you might be feeling like, hey, I'm not qualified to do this, you can look at proof, right, of track of your accomplishments and say, like, actually, my CV says I am more than qualified to do this, or I'm the
mhm,
perfect person for this position. And then finally, seeking professional help, super important. Finding a therapist is an option to help navigate imposter syndrome. Having an impartial professional, being able to discuss that with someone who can offer intervention, who can offer support and a listening ear is really great. I'm a therapist that receives therapy, so I'm a real huge advocate of going to therapy and getting some guidance there. So I'm always happy to advocate for others going as well. Just to add on as well, with a friend, you also don't know what resources they have access to. And so if you've built, a supply of resources, whether that is your own therapist, whether it is your own list of affirmations, listening to specific podcasts like these, whatever works for you, you might offer those resources to a friend or a family member. And then think about what you need, what you want when you're experiencing imposter syndrome, and be willing to offer that to others, and also be willing to offer folks what they need. So if you're the type of friend that likes to just vent to your friends, cool, and you just want them to listen, but your friend might want listening and advice, right? So like kind of meet them where they're at in ways in which you can help them too.
Yeah. Gosh, I realize I use the same words all the time, but I love that. I think what really, and it was all so helpful, and there were so many good pieces in there of like what to do when we realize, or what to do when we see it. But I think really what stuck with me the most out of all of that, just to name one thing, is identifying what you need. Because I feel like that's somewhere I personally get stuck. I get so caught up in like all the other things that I don't stop and go, what do I need in this moment to help myself?
Yes, right?
Yeah. And so you said that, and I was like, you called me out. I was like, I feel called out right now. No, that really stuck with me. Throughout everything you were saying, but I think because we're all in different spots, it was all so helpful. Wow, that's the end of my questions. I almost wish I had more prepared for you, because that was so good. I really appreciate you being here with us and kind of giving us this overview, the history, all the details on imposter syndrome, because I think it'll help a lot of people knowing more about what this is. So thank you for being here. And thank you everyone for watching.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Bye.